The December wind cut through Lower Broadway like a blade, carrying with it the mingled sense of barbecue smoke, beer, and cold anticipation. Sarah Beth Coleman pulled her worn denim jacket tighter around her shoulders, her fingers already stiff from the 32-degree temperature that had settled over Nashville that Friday afternoon. Beside her, Marcus James Sullivan was tuning his Gibson acoustic guitar, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as he hummed a melody that had been stuck in his head since morning. They had claimed their usual spot outside Legends Corner, where the foot traffic was heaviest and the acoustics bounced their music down the street in both directions. The massive mural of country legends loomed behind them, a painted reminder of everything they aspired to become. Sarah Beth set up their small amplifier, tested the microphone, and placed their open guitar case on the sidewalk with a handwritten cardboard sign that read, "Chasing Dreams, one song at a time." It was 2:30 in the afternoon, and Broadway was already beginning to pulse with life. Tourists from every corner of America streamed past, some stopping to take photos, others rushing toward the warm glow of the honky-tonks that lined the street. Sarah Beth glanced at Marcus, and without a word, they began their first song of the day, a stripped-down version of Fancy that showcased Sarah Beth's powerful crystalline vocals. Marcus had been her musical partner for 3 years now, ever since they'd met at a songwriters' night in East Nashville. He was originally from Birmingham, Alabama, a classically trained guitarist who had abandoned a promising career as a session musician to pursue his own artistic vision. Sarah Beth, a Kentucky native from a small town outside Lexington, had moved to Nashville 5 years ago with nothing but a suitcase, a Martin guitar her father had given her, and a head full of songs. "Your voice is sharp on that last verse," Marcus said between songs, his dark eyes kind but honest. "You're tensing up because you're cold." Sarah Beth nodded, flexing her fingers. "I know. I just need to warm up. Let's do Tennessee Whiskey next. That one always gets people to stop." They launched into the Chris Stapleton cover, and sure enough, a small crowd began to gather. A middle-aged couple from Ohio dropped a $20 bill into their case. A group of college students on Christmas break stopped to record them on their phones. Sarah Beth closed her eyes and let the music carry her somewhere warmer, somewhere beyond the weight of the $47,000 in medical bills that sat in a manila folder in her tiny studio apartment in Antioch. Her mother, Linda Coleman, had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer 18 months ago. Sarah Beth had gone home to Kentucky every weekend she could afford, sitting beside hospital beds, holding her mother's hand through chemotherapy sessions, watching a woman who had once been vibrant and strong become frail and frightened. Linda was in remission now, thank God, but the bills had piled up despite insurance, and Sarah Beth had taken on every expense she could to ease her father's burden. That was why she was here, on this freezing December afternoon, singing her heart out for tourists, while her fingers went numb and her dreams felt further away than ever. When the song ended, the crowd applauded and several more bills floated into their guitar case. Sarah Beth counted quickly. They had made about $85 so far, which was decent for an early Friday afternoon. If they could pull in $200 by nightfall, it would be a good day. She needed every dollar. "You okay?" Marcus asked quietly as they took a water break. He knew about her mother, about the bills, about the nights she worked as a waitress at a diner on Nolensville Pike to make ends meet. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Let's keep going." But Marcus wasn't fine either, though he tried to hide it. His parents, Thomas and Rebecca Sullivan, had been calling him more frequently lately, their disappointment growing sharper with each conversation. They had paid for his education at Berklee College of Music, expecting him to become a successful composer or professor, not a street musician struggling to pay rent on a one-bedroom apartment in Madison. His father, a successful insurance executive in Birmingham, had made it clear during their last phone call, if Marcus didn't get a real job by the new year, they would stop the monthly $500 they'd been sending to help with expenses. Marcus was running out of time, and he knew it. He was 31 years old, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, eating ramen noodles 3 nights a week, and watching his college friends post pictures on social media of their houses, their families, their stable careers. Some days, the doubt crept in like poison. Was he delusional? Was this whole dream just an elaborate form of failure? But then he would play music with Sarah Beth, and something would shift. Her voice was unlike anything he'd ever heard, raw and refined at the same time, capable of breaking your heart with a single phrase. When they harmonized, it felt like coming home. He believed in her talent more than he believed in his own, and that kept him going. "Let's do that original," Sarah Beth suggested, pulling him from his thoughts. "The one we finished last week, Basement Tapes." Marcus hesitated. Their original songs rarely earned as much money as covers, but he understood what she was really saying. "I need to remember why we're doing this." He nodded and adjusted his capo. Basement Tapes was a song they'd co-written about the struggle of being an unknown artist in a city full of dreamers. It was honest and vulnerable, and every time they performed it, Sarah Beth felt like she was laying her soul bare on the cold pavement of Broadway. As they began to play, fewer people stopped. Tourists wanted to hear songs they recognized, melodies that would soundtrack their vacation videos. But a few locals paused, leaning against the brick wall of Legends Corner, really listening. An older man with a weathered face and a veteran's cap placed a $5 bill in their case and gave them a solemn nod. A young woman about their age, probably another struggling musician, stood with tears in her eyes through the entire song. When it ended, the young woman approached them. "That was beautiful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Did you write that?" "We did," Sarah Beth confirmed, her cheeks flushed from more than just the cold. "You're going to make it," the woman said fiercely. "I don't know when, but you will. I can feel it." After she walked away, Marcus and Sarah Beth shared a look. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. That was why they did this, for moments like that, when their music connected with someone on a level that transcended money or fame or practical considerations. By 6 p.m., the temperature had dropped to 28 degrees, and Sarah Beth's fingers were so stiff she could barely form chords. They had made $217, which was actually better than expected for a December evening. The crowds were thinning as people moved indoors for dinner, and the frigid wind was becoming unbearable. "Let's call it," Marcus said, packing up his guitar. "You're shaking." Sarah Beth wanted to protest, wanted to push for another hour, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She nodded, helping him pack up their equipment. As they split the money, they always divided it evenly, even though Sarah Beth needed it more. Marcus made a suggestion. "There's an open mic at the Bluebird Cafe next Thursday. I know it's a long shot, but we should try to get on the list." "If the right person hears us there..." The Bluebird Cafe was legendary, a small venue in Green Hills where countless careers had been launched. Getting stage time there was nearly impossible, but it was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. "Let's do it," Sarah Beth agreed, pocketing her $108.50. It would go straight into the medical bill fund, but for a moment she let herself imagine something different, a future where music wasn't just a dream she chased on frozen street corners, but a reality that could sustain her. They said their goodbyes at the corner of Broadway and 4th Avenue, heading in opposite directions toward their respective buses. Sarah Beth walked quickly, her guitar case bumping against her leg, her mind already calculating how many more days like this she would need before she could make another payment to the hospital. She didn't notice the black SUV that had been parked across the street for the last 20 minutes, or the woman inside who had been watching them perform, her eyes bright with recognition and something that looked like hope. Sarah Beth's alarm pierced the darkness of her studio apartment at 5:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. She groaned, reaching out from under her pile of blankets to silence her phone, her breath visible in the cold air. The heating in her building was inconsistent at best, and her landlord, Mr. Vincent Kowalski, had made it clear that complaints about temperature were not his priority. She forced herself out of bed, padding across the cold linoleum floor to her tiny bathroom. The face that looked back at her from the mirror above the sink was tired, dark circles under her blue eyes, her blonde hair tangled from sleep. She was 28 years old but felt older, carrying weight that had nothing to do with years and everything to do with responsibility. By 6:15 a.m., she was on the bus heading toward Green Hills, where she worked the breakfast shift at Dottie's Diner 3 days a week. The diner was a Nashville institution, a 24-hour establishment where musicians, nurses, truck drivers, and insomniacs all converged for eggs, coffee, and a moment of human connection. Sarah Beth had been working there for 4 years, and while the work was exhausting, her boss, Dorothy Ann Patterson, Dottie herself, was kind and flexible about her schedule. "Morning, honey," Dottie called out as Sarah Beth pushed through the door at 6:45 a.m., right on time. Dottie was a black woman in her 60s, originally from Memphis, with silver hair she wore in intricate braids and a smile that could warm the coldest room. She had owned the diner for 30 years and knew everyone's story, including Sarah Beth's. "Morning, Dottie," Sarah Beth replied, tying her apron around her waist and grabbing her order pad. The morning rush was brutal. Construction workers needing fuel before heading to building sites across the city, parents grabbing breakfast before weekend soccer games, other service workers like herself caught between shifts, stealing a meal and a moment to breathe. Sarah Beth moved through it all on autopilot, taking orders, pouring coffee, delivering plates of pancakes and bacon with a smile that was professional, if not entirely genuine. During her break at 10 a.m., she checked her phone and found 3 missed calls from her father, William Coleman. Her heart jumped. Had something happened to her mother? She stepped outside into the cold and called him back immediately. "Sarah Beth, thank God," her father answered on the first ring. His voice was strained, and she could hear the exhaustion in every word. "Your mama had a bad night. Nothing serious," he added quickly, "but she's been in pain, and the doctor wants to do another scan next week. The insurance is going to cover most of it, but there's still going to be a deductible, around $3,000. Sarah Beth closed her eyes, leaning against the brick wall of the diner. $3,000. She had $1,847 in her savings account, money she'd been desperately hoarding for months. "Daddy, don't worry about it. I'll send you the money." "Baby girl, I can't keep taking money from you. You're barely making it yourself." "I'm fine, Daddy. I'll send it by Monday." The lie tasted bitter. She had no idea how she would come up with the remaining $1,153, but she would figure it out. She always did. When she hung up, she stood in the cold for a long moment, fighting back tears. Then she took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and went back inside. She had 4 more hours of her shift to finish. Meanwhile, across town in Madison, Marcus James Sullivan was having his own difficult morning. He'd been on the phone with his father for 45 minutes, and the conversation had deteriorated into the same argument they'd been having for months. "Marcus, I'm not trying to crush your dreams," Thomas Sullivan said, his Birmingham accent thickening with frustration. "I'm trying to inject some reality into this situation. You're 31 years old. You have a degree from one of the best music schools in the country. You could be teaching, composing for films, doing session work that actually pays. Instead, you're playing on street corners like a homeless person." "I'm not homeless, Dad. I'm an artist trying to build something real." "You're broke is what you are. Your mother and I have been subsidizing this fantasy for 3 years, and we've been patient, but enough is enough. Get a real job by January 1st, or we're cutting you off completely. No more monthly checks." "You'll be on your own." Marcus had expected this ultimatum eventually, but hearing it spoken out loud still felt like a punch to the gut. "So that's it? Either I abandon everything I've worked for, or you abandon me." "Don't be dramatic. We're not abandoning you, we're setting boundaries. If you want to play music on the weekends, fine, but you need stability. You need health insurance. You need a future." After they hung up, Marcus sat on his couch, a threadbare thing he'd found on Facebook Marketplace for $50, and stared at the water stain on his ceiling. His father wasn't entirely wrong. He was barely scraping by. His diet consisted mainly of cheap carbohydrates. He'd had a toothache for 2 months that he couldn't afford to have checked. His car, a 2008 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it, was making a grinding noise that he knew would cost more to fix than the vehicle was worth. But the thought of giving up made him feel like he was dying. Music wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. And playing with Sarah Beth, creating something beautiful out of pain and hope and struggle, that felt like the only thing in his life that mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Beth. "Open mic at Bluebird just posted. Sign up opens Monday at noon. Want to go together?" Marcus typed back, "Absolutely, let's do this." That evening, they met again on Broadway, taking their usual spot at 5 p.m. as the Saturday night crowds began to build. The temperature had dropped even further, 26 degrees with a wind chill that made it feel like the teens. Sarah Beth had layered 2 sweaters under her jacket, and Marcus wore a beanie pulled low over his ears, but nothing really kept out the cold. "You look tired," Marcus observed as they set up. "Could say the same about you," Sarah Beth replied, but her tone was gentle. They didn't talk about their respective struggles. Instead, they did what they always did. They played. They started with crowd pleasers, covers of Luke Combs and Carrie Underwood that got people singing along. The Saturday night audience was more generous than weekday crowds, and tips flowed more freely. By 7 p.m., they'd already made $150. Between songs, Sarah Beth noticed a well-dressed woman in her 40s watching them intently from across the street. The woman had auburn hair and wore an expensive-looking black coat. She seemed familiar somehow, but Sarah Beth couldn't place her. The woman pulled out her phone and appeared to be recording them. "We've got a fan," Marcus murmured, nodding slightly in the woman's direction. "Or she's documenting us for a TikTok about sad street musicians," Sarah Beth joked, but something about the woman's intense attention made her nervous. They launched into an original song, one called Highway Prayers, that Marcus had written about his grandmother who had passed away the previous year. It was a tender, heartbreaking piece about love and loss and the way certain people stay with you even after they're gone. Sarah Beth's harmony wrapped around Marcus's lead vocal like a warm embrace, and for 3 minutes and 47 seconds, the cold and the struggle and the fear all disappeared. When the song ended, the small crowd that had gathered erupted in applause. Sarah Beth looked across the street, but the auburn-haired woman was gone. "That was something special," an older gentleman said, dropping a $50 bill into their case. "You kids are the real deal." By 10 p.m., they had made $340, their best night in months. As they packed up, both exhausted but pleased, Sarah Beth felt something shift in her chest, a fragile, dangerous thing called hope. "You ever think about what we'd do if this actually worked?" she asked Marcus as they walked toward the bus stop. "Like if we actually made it?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I try not to," he admitted. "Thinking about success when you're this far from it, it feels like tempting fate. But what if we did? What would you want?" He considered the question seriously. "I'd want to make music that matters. Not just stuff that sells, but songs that help people feel less alone." "What about you?" Sarah Beth thought about her mother, about medical bills, about all the ways money could solve problems. But that wasn't the whole truth. "I'd want to show my parents that this wasn't a mistake. That all the sacrifices they made, all the times I chose music over security, I'd want them to know it meant something." "It already means something," Marcus said quietly, "even if no one ever hears us except drunk tourists on Broadway." Sarah Beth smiled but didn't respond. She wanted to believe him, but belief required a kind of faith she was running out of. They said goodnight at the bus stop, and Sarah Beth rode home alone, her guitar case on her lap, watching Nashville blur past the windows. When she finally climbed into bed at 11:30 p.m., she was asleep within minutes, too exhausted even to dream. Neither of them had any idea that the auburn-haired woman had been Melissa Ann Peterman, a talent scout for Big Machine label group, or that their performance had been sent to 3 different people in the Nashville music industry, or that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. Monday morning arrived with crystalline blue skies and temperatures that had finally climbed above freezing. Sarah Beth woke with a sense of purpose. Today was the day that open mic sign-ups opened at the Bluebird Cafe, and she and Marcus had agreed to meet at 11:30 a.m. to be online, right when registration went live at noon. She grabbed her laptop and headed to Bongo Java, a coffee shop in Belmont, where she could get reliable Wi-Fi and a cheap cup of coffee. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, his own laptop under his arm, looking determined but nervous. "Ready for this?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "Ready as I'll ever be." At exactly noon, they both hit refresh on their browsers. The Bluebird's open mic slots were notoriously competitive, usually filling up within minutes. Sarah Beth's fingers flew across the keyboard, entering their information, selecting a Thursday night slot 3 weeks away. When the confirmation screen appeared, she actually gasped. "Did you get it?" Marcus asked. "We're in December 30th, 8 p.m. slot." They sat there for a moment, stunned by their luck. The Bluebird Cafe wasn't just any venue, it was where Garth Brooks had been discovered, where Taylor Swift had played as a teenager, where the industry came to find the next big thing. This was the opportunity they'd been waiting for. "We need to be perfect," Sarah Beth said, her mind already racing through their song catalogue. "2 originals and 1 cover, that's what they allow. We need to choose carefully." They spent the next 2 hours at the coffee shop, debating which songs would showcase their talents best, which arrangements would be most impactful. By the time they left, they had their set list and a practice schedule that would have them rehearsing every day leading up to the performance. That evening, they returned to their spot on Broadway, energized by the prospect of the Bluebird performance. The Monday night crowd was smaller than the weekend rush, but steady. They set up at 4:30 p.m., just as the December sun was beginning its early descent, painting the Nashville sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah Beth was in the middle of a Reba McEntire cover, "Consider Me Gone," when she noticed a small crowd gathering that seemed different from the usual tourists. These people weren't just passing by. They were really listening, phones out, but pointed down respectfully, not interrupting or talking over the music. And then she saw her. Standing at the edge of the crowd, wearing jeans, cowboy boots, a leather jacket, and oversized sunglasses, was someone who looked exactly like Reba McEntire herself. Sarah Beth's voice wavered for just a moment before she recovered, but her heart was pounding. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Reba McEntire didn't just walk down Broadway listening to random street musicians. Marcus had noticed too. His eyes went wide, but to his credit he kept playing, his fingers steady on the guitar strings. Sarah Beth pushed through the rest of the song, pouring every ounce of her soul into it. If this was actually Reba McEntire, the Reba McEntire, one of her absolute heroes, the woman whose songs she'd been singing since she was a little girl in Kentucky, then she was going to make sure this performance counted. When the final note faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the crowd erupted in applause, and the woman in the sunglasses, "Please let it be her, please," stepped forward and slowly removed her glasses. It was her. It was actually, impossibly, really her. Reba McEntire smiled, and Sarah Beth felt like all the oxygen had left her body. "That was beautiful, honey," Reba said, her voice warm and unmistakable. "You've got a gift." Sarah Beth couldn't speak. She literally couldn't form words. Marcus, bless him, stepped in. "Ms. McEntire, we're huge fans," he managed, his voice only slightly shaky. "Your music has been a massive influence on both of us." "I can tell," Reba said with a knowing smile. "You did justice to that song. How long have you two been playing together?" 3 years, Sarah Beth finally squeaked out, finding her voice. "We met at a songwriter's night. I'm Sarah Beth Coleman, and this is Marcus James Sullivan." "Well, Sarah Beth and Marcus, I've actually heard about you two," Reba said, and both musicians looked at her in shock. "A friend sent me a video of you performing last week, an original song called Basement Tapes. That song hit me right here." She placed her hand over her heart. "It reminded me of where I came from, what it took to get where I am." You saw that?" Sarah Beth whispered. "I did, and I wanted to hear you in person." Reba glanced around at the crowd that had now recognized her and was growing larger, phones coming out everywhere. Listen, I know you're working right now and I don't want to interrupt your evening. But would you two be willing to meet me tomorrow? Say, 2 p.m. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. She pulled out her phone and, with the efficiency of someone who had been managing her own career for years, collected their phone numbers and gave them an address in Green Hills. That's my office, she explained. Security will have your names at the front. Don't be late and bring your guitars. And then, with a wink and a wave to the crowd, she was gone, climbing into a black SUV that had been waiting at the curb. Sarah, Beth and Marcus stood there, stunned, as the crowd peppered them with questions. Was that really Reba? How do you know her? Are you guys famous? They deflected as best they could and tried to continue their set, but neither of them could focus. They made it through 2 more songs before Marcus called it. We need to talk about what just happened, he said quietly. They packed up their equipment and walked to a quiet diner a few blocks off Broadway. In a corner booth, over coffee they didn't drink, they tried to process the impossible. She knew our names, Sarah Beth said for the 3rd time. She had seen our video. She wants to meet us. This doesn't happen, Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. This doesn't happen to people like us. What do you think she wants? I don't know. Maybe advice? Maybe she's just being nice. But they both knew it was more than that. People like Reba McEntire, legends who had been in the industry for over 4 decades, who had their own entertainment companies, who had nothing left to prove, didn't personally seek out street musicians just to be nice. What if this is it? Sarah Beth whispered. What if this is the moment everything changes? Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Then we walk in there tomorrow and we show her who we are. We show her what we can do, and whatever happens, happens. That night, Sarah Beth lay awake in her apartment until 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through possibilities and fears. What would she wear? What would she say? What if they got there and it was all a misunderstanding, or worse, a prank? But no, Reba McEntire didn't do pranks. This was real. Across town, Marcus wasn't sleeping either. He kept thinking about his father's ultimatum, about the January 1st deadline that was looming closer. What if this meeting with Reba led to something? What if he was on the verge of being able to prove that his choices hadn't been foolish after all? At 1:45 p.m. on Tuesday, Sarah Beth and Marcus stood outside a modern office building in Green Hills, both holding their guitar cases, both dressed in the nicest clothes they owned. Sarah Beth wore a simple navy dress with boots. Marcus wore dark jeans and the one button-down shirt he owned that didn't have any stains. "Ready?" Marcus asked. "No," Sarah Beth admitted, "but let's go anyway." They walked through the glass doors into a bright professional lobby. The security guard checked their names against a list, smiled, and directed them to the 3rd floor. When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by a young woman with a clipboard who introduced herself as Jennifer Marie Hansen, Reba's executive assistant. "She's excited to meet with you," Jennifer said warmly. "Follow me." They walked down a hallway decorated with gold and platinum records, photographs of Reba with other country legends, and framed magazine covers. Sarah Beth's hands were shaking. Jennifer knocked on a large oak door and opened it. "They're here, Reba. Send them in." The office was spacious and warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Green Hills. Reba sat behind a large desk, but stood immediately when they entered, coming around to greet them with genuine warmth. "Thank you for coming," she said, shaking both their hands. "Please, sit. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" They both shook their heads, too nervous to trust themselves with beverages. Reba settled into a chair across from them, her demeanor shifting from casual to business-focused. "I'm going to be direct with you both because I respect your time and mine. I've been in this business for over 40 years, and I've seen a lot of talent come through Nashville. Most of it is fine, some of it is good. Very rarely I see something special. You two are special." Sarah Beth felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "Your originals are strong, really strong," Reba continued. "Your harmonies are unique. Sarah Beth, your voice has a quality that can't be taught. And Marcus, your guitar work and arrangement skills are sophisticated. But more than that, you have something that most artists spend their whole careers searching for: authenticity. When you sing, I believe you." "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick. "That means more than you know." "Here's what I want to propose," Reba said, leaning forward. "I want to invest in you. Not financially, not yet, but with something more valuable. My time and my connections. I want to mentor you, help you navigate this industry, introduce you to the right people. But I need to know that you're serious, that you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked, and that you understand this is a marathon, not a sprint." Sarah Beth's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. "We're serious," she managed. "We'll do whatever it takes." "Good. Then here's where we start." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Reba McEntire had made good on her promise immediately, setting up a meeting for Sarah Beth and Marcus with Leslie Ann Matthews, her brand manager, and Justin Robert McIntosh of Starstruck Entertainment. The meetings were professional, intense, and eye-opening. "The industry has changed dramatically in the last decade," Leslie explained during their first strategy session at Reba's Green Hills office. "Streaming, social media, viral moments, they matter now in ways they didn't before. You two have talent, but talent alone won't cut it. You need a brand, a story, a presence." Sarah Beth and Marcus listened intently as Leslie outlined a plan. They would continue performing on Broadway, but now with professional quality recording equipment to capture their performances. They would establish social media accounts dedicated to their music, posting consistently to build an audience. They would network at songwriter nights, industry events, and anywhere else where decision-makers might be present. "But don't lose what makes you authentic," Reba cautioned during one of their rehearsal sessions. She had carved out time in her impossibly busy schedule to work with them twice a week, fine-tuning their originals and helping them develop their stage presence. "The business will try to sand off all your rough edges, make you palatable to the widest possible audience. Don't let them. Your rough edges are what make you interesting." Marcus found himself scribbling notes after every session with Reba, insights about songwriting, performance, and the business side of music that he had never learned at Berklee. Sarah Beth, meanwhile, was undergoing a transformation in confidence. Having someone like Reba McEntire believe in her talent was healing something deep inside. All those years of doubt, of feeling like she was chasing an impossible dream, began to feel less heavy. But the real world didn't pause for their breakthrough. Sarah Beth still worked at Dottie's Diner, still woke up at 5:30 a.m. to serve breakfast to construction workers and insomniacs. The medical bills didn't stop coming. Her mother had undergone the additional scan, and while the results were thankfully clear, the $3,000 deductible had wiped out Sarah Beth's savings completely. She was back to living paycheck to paycheck, counting dollars and quarters to make sure she had enough for bus fare and ramen noodles. Marcus, too, was still facing his January 1st deadline from his father. He had told Thomas Sullivan about the mentorship with Reba, hoping it would buy him more time, but his father had been skeptical. "A mentorship isn't a job, Marcus," Thomas had said over the phone. "It's nice that a celebrity is taking an interest, but it doesn't pay your bills. My offer stands. Get employed by the first of the year, or you're on your own." The Thursday of their Bluebird Cafe performance arrived with a cold snap that dropped Nashville temperatures into the low 20s. Sarah Beth woke feeling sick with nerves, unable to eat breakfast or focus on anything except the performance that evening. She called in sick to her shift at Dottie's, the first time she had ever done so, because she couldn't imagine slinging hash browns while her entire future hung in the balance. Reba had warned them that the Bluebird audience was tough, full of industry professionals who had heard it all, songwriters who were hypercritical, and hardcore music fans who could spot inauthenticity from a mile away. "But if you win them over," she had said, "doors will open." At 6 p.m., Sarah Beth and Marcus met outside the small venue. The Bluebird Cafe was unassuming from the outside, just a modest building that could easily be overlooked if you didn't know what it was. But inside, history lived in every corner. The small stage where Garth Brooks had once played, the tables where record executives had signed deals on napkins, the walls that had absorbed the dreams and heartbreaks of thousands of aspiring artists. They checked in with the sound engineer, did a quick sound check, and then sat in the green room, a generous term for a small area with folding chairs and a water cooler, waiting for their slot. 2 other acts would perform before them, and Sarah Beth watched on a small monitor as they took the stage. "They're good," she whispered to Marcus, anxiety rising. "Really good." "So are we," Marcus replied firmly. "We belong here." At 8 p.m. their names were called. They walked to the stage carrying their guitars, and Sarah Beth's legs felt like they might give out. The room was packed, every table full, people standing along the back wall. The lights were dim except for the stage, and she couldn't make out individual faces in the audience. Then in the front row, she spotted a familiar figure, Reba McEntire, sitting with her arms crossed and an encouraging smile on her face. Beside her was someone Sarah Beth recognized from photographs, Scott Hendricks, a legendary producer who had worked with everyone from Brooks and Dunn to Blake Shelton. Sarah Beth sat on the stool provided, adjusted her microphone, and took a deep breath. "Hi, we're Sarah Beth Coleman and Marcus James Sullivan," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Thank you for having us tonight. This first song is an original we wrote called Basement Tapes." Marcus began the intricate finger-picking pattern that opened the song, and Sarah Beth closed her eyes and sang. She sang about struggle and perseverance, about making art in the margins, about the stubborn hope that keeps you going when logic says to quit. Her voice filled the small venue, and by the second verse, the room had gone completely silent, the kind of profound silence that only happens when an audience is truly captivated. When the song ended, the applause was immediate and genuine. Sarah Beth opened her eyes and saw people nodding, saw Reba beaming, saw the producer beside her leaning forward with interest. Their second song was Highway Prayers, Marcus's tribute to his grandmother. His voice cracked slightly on the emotional bridge, but it only made the performance more powerful. Sarah Beth's harmony wrapped around his lead, and when they finished, she saw more than one person in the audience wiping their eyes. For their final song, they performed a reimagined version of Dolly Parton's Coat of Many Colors, stripped down and haunting. It was a risk, covering a beloved classic in a room full of Nashville purists, but their arrangement was respectful while still being uniquely theirs. When the final note faded, the audience erupted. People stood, Reba stood, and Sarah Beth felt something shift in the universe, felt the trajectory of her life bending towards something she had only dreamed of. After their set, they were immediately surrounded by people, songwriters complimenting their work, a music publisher asking if their originals were available for consideration, a booking agent for a popular venue in East Nashville asking about their availability, and then Scott Hendricks approached, with Reba right behind him. "That was exceptional," Scott said without preamble. "Reba told me you two were special and she wasn't exaggerating. I'd like to set up a meeting to discuss a possible development deal. Are you represented?" Sarah Beth and Marcus looked at each other, stunned. "We're not," Marcus managed. "We can address that," Reba interjected smoothly. "Scott, let's get something on the calendar for next week. I'll make sure they have proper representation before any contracts are discussed." Scott nodded and handed them each his business card. "I'm serious about this. We'll talk soon." As he walked away, Sarah Beth felt her knees buckle slightly. Marcus caught her arm. "Did that just happen?" she whispered. "I think our lives just changed," Marcus replied, his voice full of wonder. Reba pulled them aside as the venue began to empty. "You two earned this, every bit of it. This is just the beginning. There's a lot of hard work ahead, and nothing is guaranteed. But you've opened the door. Now, you have to walk through it." That night, riding the bus home at 11:30 p.m., Sarah Beth called her father. When he answered, his voice groggy with sleep, she burst into tears. "Baby girl, what's wrong?" William Coleman asked, instantly alert. "Nothing's wrong, Daddy," she sobbed. "Everything's right. Everything's finally right." She told him about the performance, about the producer, about the possible development deal. She heard her father cry too, heard him call out to her mother, heard both of them celebrating through the phone. "I'm so proud of you," her father said. "Your mama and I always knew you had something special." When she hung up, Sarah Beth sat on the bus and watched Nashville pass by her window. The same view she'd seen 1,000 times, but somehow completely different now. The city of dreams had finally, improbably, started dreaming back. The week between their Bluebird Cafe performance and their scheduled meeting with Scott Hendricks was one of the longest of Sarah Beth's life. Everything felt suspended, too fragile to celebrate, too promising to ignore. She returned to her shifts at Dottie's Diner, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the performance, imagining what a development deal might mean, trying not to jinx everything by hoping too hard. Reba had connected them with Patricia Diane Sawyer, an entertainment lawyer who specialized in representing emerging artists. Patricia had reviewed the preliminary offer from Scott Hendricks and deemed it very promising, but will negotiate improvements. She had also been firm about managing their expectations. "A development deal isn't a record deal," Patricia had explained during their first meeting. "It's the label investing in you to see if you're commercially viable." You'll get some funding for recording demos, possibly some studio time with producers, and they'll help develop your sound and image. If things go well, it can lead to a full recording contract. If not, they can drop you without any real obligation. So it's a test, Marcus had said. Everything in this business is a test, Patricia replied. On Friday, December 24th, Christmas Eve, Sarah Beth was working the morning shift at Dottie's when her phone rang. It was Reba. "Hi, honey. I know you're working, so I'll be quick. Can you and Marcus meet me at my office at 3 p.m. today?" "Today? On Christmas Eve? I know the timing isn't ideal, but I promise it'll be worth it. Can you make it?" Sarah Beth's shift ended at 2 p.m. "I'll be there." She texted Marcus, who confirmed he could make it, and spent the rest of her shift in a state of anxious curiosity. What could be so urgent that Reba needed to see them on Christmas Eve? At exactly 3 p.m., Sarah Beth and Marcus arrived at Reba's Green Hills office. Jennifer, the assistant, greeted them with a knowing smile and led them not to Reba's office, but to a larger conference room. Inside, Reba sat at a table with Leslie Matthews, Patricia Sawyer, their new lawyer, and 2 other people they didn't recognize. "Come in, sit down," Reba said warmly. "I know you're both probably wondering what this is about, so let me cut to the chase. I've been thinking about your situation, your talent, your struggle, your potential, and I've decided I want to do more than just mentor you. I want to invest in you properly." She slid a folder across the table to each of them. "This is a proposal. My company, RBI, Reba's Business Inc., wants to offer you a comprehensive support package. We'll cover your living expenses for the next 6 months so you can focus entirely on music without worrying about rent or medical bills or any of that. We'll provide professional recording equipment and studio time. We'll fund the production of a professional EP, 5 songs of your choice produced by a team we'll assemble. And we'll handle all the business management, marketing, and industry navigation while you focus on the creative work." Sarah Beth stared at the folder, unable to process what she was hearing. I don't understand. Why would you do this?" Reba smiled, and her expression was both kind and fierce, "Because I remember what it was like. I remember singing at rodeos for gas money, remember worrying about whether I could afford to chase this dream. I remember the people who helped me along the way, the ones who believed in me when I had nothing but potential. Now, I'm in a position to be that person for someone else, and you two, you're worth the investment. But what do you get out of it?" Marcus asked, his practical nature asserting itself. "If you make it, and I believe you will, RBI will receive a percentage of your earnings for a set period. The details are all in the contract. Patricia has reviewed everything, and she'll walk you through it. But I want to be clear, this isn't charity. I genuinely believe you're going to be successful, and this is as much a business decision as it is a personal one. But it's also my way of giving back to a community that gave me everything." Sarah Beth felt tears streaming down her face. "The medical bills, my mom." "All of it," Reba confirmed. "We'll set up a payment plan with the hospital. Your father won't need to worry about those debts anymore." Marcus's voice was rough with emotion. "My parents cut me off. January 1st was supposed to be my deadline. You'll be able to call them and tell them you're not just surviving, you're building a real career," Reba said. "Patricia, why don't you walk them through the specifics?" For the next hour, Patricia reviewed the contract clause by clause. The terms were generous, more generous than Sarah Beth and Marcus could have imagined. RBI would provide each of them with $2,500 monthly for living expenses for 6 months. They would cover Sarah Beth's medical debt up to $50,000. They would provide health insurance. They would fund recording, marketing, and professional development. In exchange, RBI would receive 15% of their earnings from music for the next 5 years, with the percentage decreasing to 10% for years 6 through 10 if the partnership continued. It was, Patricia confirmed, an extraordinarily fair deal and one I recommend you accept. "There's one more thing," Reba said as they neared the end of the meeting. "I've arranged for you two to open for me at 3 shows next month, one in Knoxville, one in Memphis, and one here in Nashville at the Bridgestone Arena. You'll each get 15 minutes to perform your originals in front of thousands of people. Consider it a gift, but also a challenge. Are you ready for that?" Sarah Beth couldn't speak. She simply nodded, tears still flowing. Marcus found his voice. "Ms. McEntire, Reba, I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me by working your asses off," Reba said with a grin. "Thank me by proving that my faith in you wasn't misplaced. Thank me by paying it forward someday when you're in a position to help someone else. Deal?" "Deal," they said in unison. As they left the office building an hour later, contracts signed and futures fundamentally altered, Sarah Beth and Marcus stood on the sidewalk in the December cold, both too overwhelmed to move. "What just happened?" Sarah Beth whispered. "I think Reba McEntire just changed our lives," Marcus replied. They walked to a nearby coffee shop and sat in a corner booth, both needing to process everything. Sarah Beth called her father, and this time when she cried, it was with pure, uncomplicated joy. Marcus called his parents, and for the first time in years, his father told him, "I'm proud of you, son." That evening, Sarah Beth returned to her studio apartment in Antioch for what would be one of the last times. With the RBI stipend, she would be able to afford a safer place, maybe even a 1-bedroom with heat that actually worked. She lay on her bed and thought about the journey that had brought her here. All the cold nights on Broadway, all the double shifts at the diner, all the moments when quitting had seemed like the only logical choice. And she thought about Reba McEntire, a woman who had reached the absolute pinnacle of her industry and still remembered what it felt like to struggle. A woman who had chosen to extend a hand, not because she had to, but because she could. The gesture wasn't just about money or opportunity. It was about dignity. It was about someone seeing your worth before the world did. It was about the transformative power of believing in someone's potential when they're on the verge of giving up on themselves. On January 15th, Sarah Beth Coleman and Marcus James Sullivan stood backstage at the Knoxville Civic Auditorium, waiting for their cue to walk onto a stage in front of 6,500 people. They were both terrified and exhilarated, dressed in new stage clothes that RBI had provided, holding guitars that had been professionally set up by Reba's tech team. "You ready?" Marcus asked the same question he always asked. "No," Sarah Beth admitted, the same answer she always gave. "But let's go anyway." They walked onto that stage, into the lights and the noise and the impossible reality of their dreams coming true. And when Sarah Beth stepped up to the microphone and introduced them to the roaring crowd, she thought about all the people who had helped them get here, her parents, who had sacrificed so much, Dottie, who had given her flexible shifts, the strangers on Broadway who had stopped to listen, Patricia, Leslie, and the whole RBI team. But mostly, She thought about Reba McEntire, standing in the wings, watching them with a proud smile, a living testament to what success with grace looked like. "Hi, Knoxville," Sarah Beth said, her voice strong and clear. "We're Sarah Beth Coleman and Marcus James Sullivan, and this is a song called Basement Tapes. It's about what happens when you refuse to give up on your dreams, even when the world tells you to quit." As Marcus played the opening notes and Sarah Beth began to sing, she knew that whatever came next, success or struggle, fame or obscurity, she would never forget this feeling, the feeling of being believed in. The feeling of a door opening just when you thought you'd run out of hallways to walk down. The feeling of grace extended and a future rewritten by one woman's unexpected, life-changing gesture. 3 months later, Sarah Beth Coleman and Marcus James Sullivan would sign a recording contract with Big Machine Label Group, with Scott Hendricks producing their debut album. 2 years after that, their single, Basement Tapes, would reach number 3 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart. 5 years later, Sarah Beth would win the CMA Award for Female Vocalist of the Year. But on that January night in Knoxville, none of that had happened yet. They were just two musicians who had been given a chance, standing on a stage they had only dreamed of, singing songs that had been born on cold street corners in Nashville, Tennessee. And in the wings, Reba McEntire watched them shine, knowing she had done what the best mentors always do, not create success, but recognize it, nurture it, and give it room to grow into something extraordinary. The story of Sarah Beth and Marcus would be told many times in the years that come, in interviews, in documentaries, in the liner notes of their albums. And every time they would mention that December night when a country music legend heard something special in two struggling street musicians and decided to change their lives with a single, transformative gesture of belief. Because that's what real generosity looks like. Not just writing a check, but seeing potential in people when they can barely see it in themselves, and giving them not just opportunity, but dignity, support, and the chance to become who they were always meant to be.